Big spoilers for Elbath ahead. However, after all of this, Emu is a parrot talk that's been going on my channel and around YouTube. I want to point out something that I have noticed for quite a while now. The various similarities that are quite eerie between Ivankov and Emu, because in chapter 1086, it is Ivankov himself who tells us the proper family name of Emu, saying that Emu belonged to House Nerona. So that's weird. And on top of that, they suggest that Emu could have had the everlasting life surgery usually performed by an op fruit user, which is also quite odd considering in being the user of the hormone fruit, Ivankov is a bit of a master of the human body as well. But when you look at the unveiled design of Emu and how Ivankov usually looks, there are some similarities to be drawn, even if you throw in the silhouetted variant of Emu, because oddly, both Emu and Ivankov wear crowns all the time. Oddly, the first time that we see Emu without a crown is when they come to Elbath. But in talking about their designs, both Emu and Ivankov wear markings of some sort of alliance on their person, as Ivankov wears a Jolly Roger tattoo on his chest, and Emu has various tattoos on their body, as well as the mark of the Depths Government on their cape. Ivankov also has a cape, and both of them have long, luxurious hair, as Ivankov has an afro, and then Emu has long locks. But on top of that, both of their eyes are emphasized in a way, as even though Emu doesn't have any sight powers that we know of so far, Emu's eyes have always been the center point of their design, as before their reveal in Elbath, they were the only thing that we would see of them. But after they appear in Elbath, we see that they still have the same eyes, but those same eyes are decorated throughout the weird black ring on their back. So eyes have been a very important part of Emu's design since the beginning. This is the same case for Ivankov, because oddly, Ivankov has a technique called Death Wink, which can be upgraded into Hell Wink, which is a part of the new Kama Kenpo fighting style that they most likely have developed. And this technique is just Ivankov winking. However, said wink exudes such incredible force that it is able to deflect the blast of a cannonball back at an assailant. So it's quite odd that both of the eyes of these characters are emphasized in such a way. But moving on from that, when you get into story beats, some very interesting similarities arise, because as we know, it has been highly speculated that the world government as they are now most likely kicked the Lunarians off of the Red Line to establish Marijois. So they came in and stole the land from other people. Therefore, they are on borrowed land. The same thing could perhaps be suggested with the Kamabaka Queendom, because the Kamabaka Queendom doesn't really have any history to it. It only seems to be an island that appeared one day, and there's no actual record of its existence before Ivankov named themselves the Queen of the Land. So it has always been my theory that Ivankov took over some kingdom and made it his own paradise, using the hormone fruit abilities to affect the land at large. That's why the various fauna also look like the people who inhabited the land, because that is due to the powers of the hormone fruit. So that is a very interesting comparison that might come to light in the future. However, moving on from that, Ivankov might have abilities similar to Emu, because in chapter 537, going on into 538, we learn a few things about Ivankov and how he uses his abilities, because Ivankov was attacked by a man named Belet. Belet was a prince of a kingdom that fell once his father, the king of the land, went to Kamabaka Queendom and was turned into a woman. It is suggested by Ivankov that the king in question wanted to become a woman. However, there is a possible lie laced in this accusation, because once Ivankov details his own abilities, saying that a newcomer is someone affected by his abilities who has been both man and woman, he then goes on to say that as a user of the hormone fruit, he can control gender, body temperature, pigmentation, growth, excitement, and he is an engineer of the human body who can alter people from the inside. This suggests that he can also brainwash people as well, because dopamine is a hormone as well. So, seeing as how he can engineer the human body, he can do whatever he wants and make people want whatever he desires them to want by just a prick of his fingertips. Keeping that in mind, and seeing as how newcomers are a part of a special club under him, the same things could be applied to what Imu does to individuals, because when an individual wants to be a holy knight or wants to prove themselves to Imu, they enter a covenant with Imu, getting one of 3 markings to prove their loyalty. You have a Shallows Covenant mark, a Depths Covenant mark, and an Abyssal Covenant mark. So, with each mark, makes you more and more indebted to Imu and their abilities. And once you get the Depths Covenant mark and become a Holy Knight, Imu can do whatever they want to do to you, include control the afflicted person's mind. And we see this happen to Harold during the events of Elbath. And in the worst circumstances, Imu can hijack the body completely and give the person unyielding strength and an undying body, as those affected with the Depths Covenant have the ability to become immortal and therefore regenerate from seemingly fatal wounds most of the time. So with that being said, both Imu and Ivankov afflict people and bring them into a fold, having the power to manipulate their bodies from the inside out in a way, and possibly in both cases brainwashing the person afflicted. Continuing off of that point, it's also quite interesting. In some cases, Imu will actually use a technique called Dami Reversi, which requires them to insert their tendrils into an individual, much like how when Ivankov wants to affect someone, syringes will come out of his fingertips and he will stab the individual and inject them with whatever hormone he desires. So in both cases, you could say both Imu and Ivankov need to inject their victim with influence in order for them to bend to their will. Now, we don't know the exact mechanics of how Imu performs Dami Reversi or any other possession outside of the different covenant seals, but that is something that we have seen them do. So, keeping that in mind, another very interesting point that has come up is that when Ivankov is talking to Bella about how he changed his father and then goes on to change himself into a woman, the same thing does happen between Imu and Harold, as Imu afflicts Harold and tries to mind control Harold in order to take over Elbath. However, Harold is stopped by the efforts of Loki after eating the dragon fruit mythical type model Nidhogg. And in the future, which is the present day of One Piece, Imu then personally fights against Loki, whom is one of 2 princes of Elbath. And in their confrontation between Loki and Luffy, they attempt to brainwash the 2 using their tendrils. However, for whatever reason, this does not work. So that requires them to go to Elbath personally, in which they fight a full-on battle with Loki head-on. Now, in both situations, a king was afflicted by the person in question, and then the son of that king, the prince of the land, comes to avenge their father. This is the case with Bela and his father against Ivankov, and with Loki and his father Harold. And in both situations, the prince does fail, as Bela is turned into a woman, and currently in the manga, Loki has been defeated by Imu. So, with that being said, what's also quite interesting on the topic of Elbaf is that both Imu and Ivankov use giants in order to secure a secluded spot in an otherwise secure logion, because it is Imu who commands Harold to make a magic circle in Orth's castle in order for Holy Knights and then Imu themselves to come to Elbaf. Then, when you're talking about Impel Down, it was Morley using the powers of the Push fruit, who created level 5.5. It is then later in the future that we find out that Morley is considered a newcomer, which means that Morley is in a covenant with Ivankov, meaning that Morley has been changed by Ivankov before. And then later, Ivankov would then occupy level 5.5, calling it New Kamaland, which is currently the location and home of Mr. 2. So, with that being said, both of them have utilized giants for this very purpose of making a secluded location for them to thrive in enemy territory. But continuing on, both Ivankov and Imu have their own private armies. Now, Ivankov is the commander of the G Army, which covers the Grand Line. However, on Kamabaka Queendom, there are 99 masters of New Kama Kimpo, meaning there are 99 people, 100 including Ivankov themselves, who are proficient at this particular fighting style, a fighting style that allows a person to blink and deflect cannonballs with. So, when you put that into consideration, there are very few people in the One Piece world who have over 10 people that are proficient in a fighting style, let alone masters of a particular fighting style. Imu is more or less the same in that way, because Imu has the Holy Knights. We don't know how many Holy Knights there are, but Holy Knights are by and large the most powerful world government force that we know of. They seem to be more powerful than those of CP0 or any of these Cypherpole branches, and they are generally more powerful than Marines, though the Marines are still considered the strong armed force of the world government, and therefore they too are technically Imu's private army as well. So in both cases, you could say that both characters do have their own private armies. Imu has the Holy Knights, the Cypherpole, and the Marines, while Ivankov has their G-Unit army on top of the 99 masters of New Kama Kimpo. Also, as a founder of the Revolutionary Army, he has access to those forces as well. And it's unclear what position he has in the organization exactly, outside of being the commander of the G Army, but it seems like, seeing as how he was a founder, he's fairly high ranked. So that settles that. So both of them have access to private armies. Now, when talking about their individual assistants, things get a little interesting because they're oddly similar. So, of course, Ivankov's assistant is Inazuma, and Imu's assistant is Gunko. Now, both of these characters are dual colored. Inazuma has orange and white hair, often wears an orange and white coat, and has orange and white sunglasses. And these colors are split right down the middle. With Gunko, she has heterochromia with one blue eye and one red eye. Both of them have very interesting powers, as both of them are Paramecia type Devil users, but both of them have this weird relationship with cloth-like material, because with the Snip fruit, Inazuma can spawn scissors on their body, and when they cut inanimate objects, they can treat those objects like paper, though in a way it moves like cloth as well. So that's interesting. And It's one of 3 devil fruits in this series that are cloth related, the other being the Ripple fruit held by Diamante of the Don Quixote family. But then you have the 3rd one in Gunko, as she has the arrow fruit, which allows her to spawn these arrow-like constructs that too act like cloth. Then both of them are in these interesting states that are provided by their superiors, because Inazuma has the ability to turn into a man or a woman. Usually to fight, they become a man, but at rest, they are often female presenting. I think this is because of Ivankov. However, the odd thing about this is that you would think that it's an effect of the hormone fruit. However, Ivankov has never once touched Inazuma. So oddly, it seems as though Inazuma can change their gender on the fly without the assistance of Ivankov, which is interesting that no other character seems to be able to do. A similar case could be said for Gunko, as Gunko has immortality granted to her by Imu. However, she has remained in her early 20s or so, despite being nearly 80 years old at age 77. However, we don't know why this is. This could be a special ability given to her by Imu, or this could be a cause of her arrow fruit. We don't know why she's able to stay young while other people affected with the same covenant seals have grown older as time has gone on. So that's quite peculiar. In addition to, both of them appear to be female because, as I said, when at rest, Inazuma is always female. So I would think that Inazuma was originally a female character, but then gained the ability to become male thanks to Ivankov. And then, of course, Gunko is a woman. And both parties seem to be younger than the master in question. So, with that being said, those are the weird peculiarities I found about Ivankov and Imu. And it's quite weird that this has persisted throughout the story, particularly starting with Ivankov stating the full name of Imu before anyone else was given the chance to. So it's always been a grand mystery as to why he in particular was chosen to relay this information to us, the readers and viewers. But with that being said, if you are enjoying the video so far, click the like button. And if you want to see more from me, hit the subscribe button, followed by that bell so you never miss a video. In addition to, if you could, hit the hype button because it really does help. And with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What's it?